Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Fearless Podcast, a show dedicated to all things related to fear, anxiety, and general mental well-being. I'm your host, Zach Schaefer, and on this week's episode, I'm super excited to bring you guys a conversation between myself and Dr. Will White. Dr. Will White has been involved with, every episode of the Fearless Podcast. He's the producer of our show. He's the host of his own podcast, Stories from the Fields, Mental Health in the Outdoors. He has been working in the behavioral health space for over 30 years and recently has been going through a career transition at a later stage in his life. And as we talk about on the podcast today, all transitions come with anxiety because with transitions there comes uncertainty. And so in some recent conversations I've been having with Will, just in our personal lives, I could see that he was in a deep moment of reflection and he was navigating this transition in a way that was really beautiful and graceful. And so I figured, as he often does, he had some wisdom that he could share about how to navigate the anxiety and fear that can be associated with transitions, especially late life transitions for people who are at the later ages of their career, maybe thinking about retirement and what comes next. So this podcast is all about late life transitions and what Dr. Will White has learned through his recent experience of going through a transition himself. Before we hop into the episode, a quick shout out to our sponsor, Mountain Valley Treatment Center. Mountain Valley is a residential treatment program located in Plainfield, New Hampshire, serving adolescents and young adults ages 13 to 20 who are struggling with anxiety, OCD, and related disorders. I'm fortunate enough to be the executive director of Mountain Valley, and they sponsor my ability to do this podcast and to bring all this content to you. So if you enjoy this podcast, if you enjoy this episode, and you want to learn a little bit more about what we're all about, please visit us at www.mountainvalleytreatment.org. Thanks so much, and enjoy this podcast episode with Dr. Will White. Will, welcome to the show.
Zach, thank you for having me.
You are not a stranger to the Fearless Podcast. I know you've been on here as a guest before, but even when you're not on here as a guest, you're on here for every episode to do all the editing and background for the show, which maybe not a lot of people know.
It's been a great experience. I learned so much from your guests and also from you.
And being a podcast producer for my small show that is Fearless is just a very teeny piece of who Will White is and what Will White has done in his career in this behavioral and mental health space. So why don't you give our listeners a little bit of background on who you are?
Oh, boy. So I've worked in behavioral health care for over 35 years, primarily in residential settings. I worked in hospitals. I worked at traditional boarding schools. I co-founded an adventure therapy program that still operates today. It's called Summit Achievement, which is now part of Mooselock Visions. And in 2022, I sold with the other owners to Mooselock Visions, and then I became part of Mooselock Visions, and I helped you out at Mountain Valley and done other projects like the podcast, and I helped with the website. And I also, during my journey at working at Summit Achievement, I had a lot of different roles, as we all wear different hats. I was a clinical director. I was a therapist. At a period of time, I was the CEO. Period of time, I was outreach, and I clean bathrooms. You do a lot of different things, and I like to be busy. I'm a busy person, and I'm really curious. So I also, in about 15 years into helping run Summit, I pursued a doctorate in leadership, where I ended up with a book called Stories from the Field, A History of Wilderness Therapy. My dissertation turned into a book, and then I started a podcast in 2018, Stories from the Field, which started as demystifying wilderness therapy, and then as the field kind of expanded into different areas, it was more like Stories from the Field, mental health in the outdoors made a lot more sense to me because it was more to the bigger umbrella. And then, I've taught at Plymouth State University, and recently I'm doing some stuff on the side for years, consulting to organizations. Actually, Mountain Valley, I was brought in the first year it started and consulted with them. And I've consulted with companies like the Patagonia company that makes outdoor clothing, and Mansfield Hall. So I've done a lot of different things, and now I'm in a period of my life where I'm just slowing down. I just don't have the energy that I used to have, and that's just the nature of life.
And to think that you slowing down still means that you're producing your own podcast, producing my podcast, starting a new leadership group, which we'll talk about. The furthest thing from slow. And if I'm still engaged in life in the way that you're engaged in life, hiking mountains every day, backcountry skiing every day in the wintertime, I'll be living well, my friend.
Well, there's a lot of research that shows being busy, curious, and active and being with people is good for longevity, and I'm grateful. In my family, those who came before me role modeled that for all of us. And my father wrote a book in his 80s. So,
wow, I didn't know that. Well, you are in a period of transition in your life. And, now that you've kind of given the timeline too, you've kind of been in a period of transition a bit since leaving Summit in 2022. There was a period of being involved with Moose Lock Visions, but even in there, you're with Mountain Valley for a while, with the new trade that they started for a while, just kind of being pulled in a lot of different directions. And as we were talking the other day, and I got thinking about, I associate times of transition with anxiety, and that's because at Mountain Valley, we work with teenagers and young adults, and whether it's a small transition in the day from the first shift to the second shift, whether it's a transition into the program, out of the program, or the larger life transition that most teenagers and young adults find themselves in as they individuate, anxiety is something that comes because with transitions there comes uncertainty. And I have been so beautifully impressed by how you have gracefully navigated this point in your life that you're in a transition. And so I thought it would be fun to have you on and talk about anxiety with transitions and talk a little bit more about internally what's going on for you right now.
Well, I think that it's important to recognize William James. He was a philosopher, psychologist too, I think, who taught at Harvard in the early 1900s. He had this term. He said, life is in the transitions. Like growth is when you are in transitions, and embracing transitions. I think it was 1910 he wrote that. But the Buddhists write about it. I mean, supposedly the Buddha in the right, his teaching was life is full of suffering, and a lot of the suffering is transitions, big transitions. And so we're constantly going through, not unlike trauma, big T and little t, it's big transitions and little transitions. You have transitioned to now having a title called a father, and you have sons. And I've transitioned not too long ago to being an empty nester. So those are transitions that happen in so many people's lives. And a guy named Bruce Feiler, I recommend his book, and he wrote a book called Life is in the Transitions. And he talks about, we all go through transitions. There's natural transitions. Like all of us went through a very difficult transition that wasn't planned for, and that was called COVID. We all experienced it. We all experienced it differently. And yet, other transitions, the big ones in this book, and Feiler wrote about, he talks about lifequakes. Lifequakes are things that happen like, oh, I didn't anticipate this happening. So running and working at Summit for over 26 and a half years, I didn't anticipate selling it when we did, right? But we did. Or I anticipated, I'm going to work a few more years. And I'm not working full time anymore. And that wasn't a plan for. So it was a quake. And how do we deal with quakes, big things? And so a lot of people, more than half of the people in this country, have experienced divorce in their families. And that is a life quake. And how do we grow through those life quakes? I mean, there's some other, it was Gail Sheehy who wrote the book called Passages and talked about midlife crisis. But actually, we have periods of crisis every 2 to 5 years, unanticipated deaths of friends or family. And it's really, how do we deal with those? And how do we embrace them and see them not as, oh my gosh, I can't believe this, to, oh my gosh, I'm going to learn so much right now. Like, I am learning so much right now. And I'm leaning into, wow, this changes. I have worked full time for 35 years, and now I'm not. And it's like, oh, I didn't prepare for it to happen like that, but what can I learn from it?
And I think you're tapping into sort of the mindset shifts and perspective shifts that can really help us navigate transitions in a healthy way. I'm curious for you, if you're willing to be vulnerable for a minute, what kind of insecurities and anxieties did it bring up, like before you got to that place of shifting perspective? Or maybe you've been through so many transitions that it's natural for you to kind of go right to that perspective. But I'm curious if any fears and thoughts and wonderings, ruminations hit your mind at all during this time.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think as you age, you start realizing you're not as sharp. My memory used to be like, I could remember names, dates, times, movie titles. I just can't do that as well as I used to. And then people don't call and email me for information. And so I became like, oh, people don't want me anymore because I'm aging. I'm not as valuable to society. And I think a lot of people go through that. I'm, speaking from a position of white man of privilege, but many mothers and fathers who become full-time caretakers of their children often feel like, well, I'm not as valued because I'm not in the workforce or making money. And so I think it can relate to so many different parts of yourself. But for me, when I was as busy as I just said in the opening, I was like dealing with emails, texts, like phone calls, almost 10 to 15 hours a day. Zach, you know what that's like? Yes, you do, because you're a very busy person. And that's not what it's like for me anymore. And that, in some ways, I felt I put value in that. Like, my self-esteem has lowered during this period of like, oh, they don't want me to work there anymore. Wow, they don't like me. They don't see me as valuable. And that, I think, for anyone, whether it's a teenager or an old, if you don't feel valued or embraced or part of the organization, you feel sort of like, they cast me out. And it's hard. And yet, if we reframe to say, like, what can I learn now? And how can, and we all pivot, if we're fortunate enough to work as long as I have, we pivot to a time where we can use a different strength that I have, which is the author, I think his name is Arthur Brooks, wrote a book called From Strength to Strength. And he talks about when you're very early in your career, you have a much more of a problem solving, a quick and moving quick, and be able to concrete respond to things. And what happens as you age is you have more of like a crystallized intelligence. You have more of a reflectant wisdom, hopefully some amount of wisdom. And you can be a mentor and encouraging people to, like, well, slow down, perhaps your emotions are driving you right now versus someone who's moving 100 miles an hour. And I think this era we're in right now, I am not a digital native. I embrace technology, but the speed at which we are seeing things change and how it's impacting our brains is really overwhelming to me. And I know a lot of people are talking about it and encouraging people to step away, but I don't see it happening in practice that much.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you talking about that strength to strength kind of how do you find what is valuable, what you have to offer now, like what your value is now. And I mean, I know you get this from a lot of people other than just me, but just to affirm that, like, you are such a great mentor, and you are such like I think of you as a wise wizard every time I get a chance to talk to you. And for someone who's 32 and starting a family and just taking over a business and in the same field that you were in, like, I see you as like the perfect person I need in my kind of corner to keep me grounded, to help me see the forest for the trees. And there's so much value in that. I have plenty of people I can find who are quick and good with AI and good with technology and can problem solve and have a lot of energy. And I find not a lot of people who have the ability to slow me down and help me think from a wise-minded standpoint. And so, like, I think that there's such a value add there that a lot of our I hope you don't take offense to this, our older population has to offer us. And if I can for a minute too, the first time I remember this like really coming to presence for me was prior to working at Mountain Valley, I worked at UNC Chapel Hill in the inpatient unit. And UNC Chapel Hill was a beautiful place because they had so many different inpatient psychiatric units. And one of them was a geriatric unit. And it wasn't just a memory care unit. It was for anyone over the age of 60 that was struggling with their mental health. And so some people up there were people who were depressed because they recently retired and didn't know how to fulfill their life. And what they found fulfillment in was teaching me. And so although I was the therapist showing up there to try to work with them on their depression, what I actually had to do was take a back seat and let them teach me. And through teaching me, they found meaning and purpose and a sense of value again. We used to run these reminiscence groups where they would be, bringing up old news articles and teaching us about the history of what happened in North Carolina before we got there, all kinds of stuff. And just putting them in the seat of the teacher, you could see their spirit light up again and feeling like they had something to contribute. And so that memory just really came potent in my mind listening to you speak.
Oh, I so appreciate that. And I so appreciate the episodes where you interview students, former students of Mountain Valley, because they're teaching us about their own experience, their own journey. I think at any age, someone can be your teacher. I learn from all ages, even babies teach you, like the joy of life and being present. But I really like that model. I hadn't heard that. So that's very cool.
Now, you mentioned a couple of different perspective shifts that people who are in transition can have as far as like a good question and a good maybe just operating framework is, what can I learn from this? Is like a great question to ask. Any other like good questions to ask or like reflective prompts that sort of help you reframe these kinds of moments?
Yeah, I have really been working with a prompt of, is the life I'm going to create for the next number of years because I plan to work another decade, and I come from a family of long-lived people, and what work am I going to do that is really going to align with my values? And I think that is, a lot of people work in spaces where it's not aligning to their values. In the mental health space, in general, we have like this halo. Oh, you work in mental health and you've done all this. But some organizations, people aren't in alignment with the organization. They may be in alignment with the work they do, but not necessarily with the company and the leadership. Now, I think it's really important for everybody, and especially for older people, to see like, all right, is what I'm going to do aligning with my values? And my number one value is service. It's service to others. And it was something that was very much encouraged in my family and by my parents and by my grandparents, that you give and you give back and you provide. And I took it to the whole profession thing. And even now it's like, how am I going to provide service going forward that will also align with my values of, I want to be spending more time in nature, because I think that is helping in this world that we're becoming more technology focused. I think spending more time in nature, where we evolved out of, helps us to be able to see things as life is. We all were born, we live life, and then we die, like trees, like everything. And so recently I wrote a piece, I don't know if you read it, about the fall of my career, because I am literally in the fall of my career in terms of this season. It's not like, oh, something bad happened. It's like, oh, I have only so many more years to work. What am I going to do in my work life that will provide as much service to as many people without barriers like costs or things like that nature? And also, I try to wake up every day and say, like, I live, what a wonderful thing. I am alive. I'm waking up. I'm healthy. I have a family that loves me. And everything I'm going to do today, I do by choice. I try not to do things that I don't have a choice in.
Yeah, I did read your piece, and when I read the title at first, I was like, "Oh, the fall of his career!" Like, I don't know
that was a good tagline.
It was a great tagline. It got me intrigued. I was like, "Oh man, like this might be a really sad read," and it wasn't. And it was such a beautiful metaphor. And I didn't ask you this, when we were talking about the article the other day, but I'm curious. Like, have you conceptualized? Since you conceptualized this time in your life through that season of fall, like, are you able to look back and kind of see like what the spring and the summer and all of that was?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely the spring was really education, like all the education, either through formal education or through life experiences. Like I'm at my family farm that's been in my family since 1895. One of the best educations I ever had was when I was younger. We would come up here to work every summer. We didn't go to beaches or stuff like that. We came up. My grandmother was here at the time. She would live here for 6 months out of the year, but we would come up to help her. And my father, who was a corporate executive, and I did not perceive him, and he later told me he did not like his career at all. It was too stressful. He didn't like working in a city, but when he was here, he was happy and content, and loved being outside and taking us hiking and teaching us to hunt and fish and all the woodcraft things, as well as how do we get the wood stove going, et cetera, et cetera. And I saw that and said, oh, he is more comfortable and happy in the woods. And so I want to be a lot of my time in the woods and in the mountains. And then so that was one of the lessons I learned. So I think spring is when you're learning. Summer is when for me, the way I was raised and the way it just happened between my wife and I became the primary breadwinner. And I did that for 35 years. And so and that's part of the challenge, is then all of a sudden you're not doing that anymore. And you're like, oh, I'm not as much of a provider. So I think it's learning and then earning and growing. And I really give younger generations, they're just more, my wife did a really good job in connecting with the kids, and I feel I did a better job as I got older, and especially because of working in the field that we worked in, saw how important it was to have a connection and put down the phone and not answer the phone. But as you know, running a mental health center 24/7, 365, it comes at a cost to your family. And people who say, oh, well, it doesn't have to be, like, it does. There's a certain amount, and it can be a lifequake, or it can just be just day to day. Because unlike some of my friends who worked in academia or boarding schools, they had, here's the break, we have 3 months, or we have this. But residential never stops. It's 365, 24/7.
Yeah, and I love their conceptualization of the seasons too, and I'm thinking about fall time and just how beautiful of a time a year that is, but we're also we're in awe at the beauty of things that are dying, like the the leaves are turning those beautiful colors because they're dying, right? But we're looking at it as this beautiful, and it is a beautiful thing. So it's just a very interesting contrast, I think, that we're not always aware of. We're in awe of the process of the end of life and heading in that transition towards the end of life. And the other thing that fall time always does for me, and I don't know if it's specific to me because of my history with football and that being during that time of year, but it's a huge time for reflection and gratitude for me. Every year, some of my biggest emotional moments, unprompted emotional moments, are in the fall time, where I just get hit with these deep waves of gratitude, and appreciation and reflection on where I've been and where I'm going. And it sounds like, based on your answer or your response there, it's similar for you during that time.
Yeah. Going back to, I've studied a lot of Buddhism, and I spent some time in Buddhist monasteries in my life in retreat. One of the key things is recognizing we're all going to die. And in the fall, I'm fortunate I've made it to the fall. That's so cool. I have had, as you have had, friends who didn't make it past spring, or they passed in summer. I am now fall, so I'm embracing wow, here I am. How fortunate, how lucky I am to be alive. And in this fall of life, I can be there for people who are suffering, who are losing people, or for family members who are dying. It was just a year and a half ago. I spent 7 days while my father died in hospice, but I was by his bedside the majority of the time. And that was part of the process of life. And it was a lifequake, but it wasn't, he was 95. That's going to happen. Other quakes are when, somebody's 25, and families have to deal with that. And I've certainly been there to support people who've gone through that. But we go through these quakes, and those are natural progressions. And again, I use the seasons because we live. I spend a lot of time in the woods, and what I love about Mountain Valley, it's in this beautiful location, very therapeutic, environmentally therapeutic. And you have animals there where you see birth, you see animals grow, and then you see them pass or what. And those are important things that we don't, death is one of those times that we sit down and reflect more. And a lot of times, especially, I know you did an episode about your friend's suicide, it resets you. It makes you go, what is really important in my life? Is what I was thinking about a week ago really important?
Yeah, it's an incredible reset and reframe. And oftentimes, depending how big the quake is, something that lasts forever and an anchor point every time you start to get caught up in some of the trivial stuff. Well, this has been a really great talk, and I think for me, I would love to maybe end with like some practical things that you're doing to support yourself in this transition. So we've talked about the bigger like mindset, reframes, questions you're asking. You've mentioned it a couple times, but just to make it explicitly clear, you're spending a lot of time in nature because that's a place for you that's restoring and reflective.
Yeah. I do a lot more. I've always written in a journal, but I'm actually doing much more journal writing. I'm doing a lot more reading, not online, but reading articles. I'm spending time with people who I have really a cohesive relationship. So not like transactional, I'm spending time because they're paying me or I want to sell them something, but people who want to have conversations that are more meaningful and deep and related to this journey we all have, which is the journey of life. And those journeys, I'm very open with like, hey, I'm in this period of time that it's really interesting because it's like having children. You're never prepared till you have children. And then you have children, you're like, oh, this is what they said you'll never be prepared for till it happens. And I think that when people have, if they're fortunate enough to age and work for a long career, and then it stops, it's like, wait, oh, I feel like I need to keep running, but the race is over. And so I'm really spending a certain amount of time putting in much more reflective, reading a lot more philosophy and psychology, even though I've always read about the psychology. It isn't like, oh, I've got to help this person. That is more like, how can I help myself more? Doing more men's retreats and co-ed retreats, being part of communities of people who are working on themselves. And you know, I've helped start the Leadership Growth Guild for leaders and programs, and I also have the White Mountain Adventure Institute where I'm coaching people. And I've done that on and off for years, as well as consulting to programs. But now I'm taking it, having an experience as a therapist is great to be in the coaching way, because then you're not as stuck on state lines and stuff like that. But it also helps me to say, hey, I'm going to coach you. I'm not, there's a clear difference between coaching, which is more future oriented, present and future, whereas psychotherapy is often dealing with issues of the past. So those things, I mean, the main thing I'm doing is helping myself and others become much more aligned with their leadership values, their values as human beings. Do I want to be a compassionate leader or a caring, supportive leader? Or do I want to be a leader who can really motivate teams? Because that's what that feels good. Of course, you want to have all those things, but does it align with your value system?
Yeah, really cool. Yeah, the retreat piece was something I wanted to talk about, so I'm just going to double click on there real quick. For folks who have never been to a retreat, what is it, and why is it such a transformative kind of punch-packed way in a couple of days to really do some heavy lifting and heavy work on yourself?
You know, the best way I can describe it is it's adventure therapy for adults, right? So really, it's about spending a period of time, and I have an AI company coming here in a month to spend like 4 days with me on the farm, and this is a new startup, and I'm like, most of the time it's like, let's put the phones away, and we're going to spend some time slowing things down. What are our goals? So like you do in any group setting, what are our values? What is our full value contract? What do we want to get in, and what do we want to get out of this retreat? The retreats I do at Cole Farm, which is where I am right now, is a lot of it is hiking or walking in the woods. I say it's not that much big hikes. It's walking in the woods a lot. It's sitting down and having intensive facilitated conversations directly at dilemmas that somebody is facing or the organization is facing. It is also having some fun, going down to swimming hole and being challenged to do things that are somewhat uncomfortable. And what is it? Helen Keller said, right? Life is one big adventure or nothing at all. So it's pushing people to do things challenged by choice, but in a facilitated, organized way. Some people are choosing to camp out at the farm. Some people are going to be inside. We eat really good food. And then I have another retreat after that later in the fall, and that is designing the rest of your life for men who are looking at their lives like, perhaps they're your age, deciding how do I design, and really would encourage them to design the next 10 years, not the rest of their life. But for me, I'm working on my next 10 years of work life.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, really cool. And I've never been to a retreat, but there's been like that lingering voice in the back of your mind that knows that it's something that you're going to need to do at some point. And you've been such a big proponent of them. So it's nice and cool to be able to hear you kind of share what they've done for you and what you're trying to do with them for other people.
Yeah. Cold plunges. I have a cold plunges because I've done that with you at Mountain Valley. And it's very much... when I lived in a Buddhist monastery in Thailand, it's like that. It's not unlike a retreat. It's very similar to any spiritual or psychological tradition, like time away to reflect and reset and rejuvenate. Mm-hmm. And Mountain Valley does that for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in some ways, I think Mountain Valley can be framed as a retreat, and some kids would frame it as that. At that point in their life, it's an opportunity to take a step back, reflect, set intentions, and move forward. And the structure of the program tries to do that too, with the first phase being all about reflection and writing a personal narrative. And this is what brought me here, and here's the intentions I have for this next step in the next 30 days of my journey here, and kind of setting your eye forward on where you want to go. So yeah, seeing the process certainly been healing for a lot of people.
Right. And adults should be using it just as much as young people, because life is full of challenges. And do we want to kind of rise up to those challenges with courage, wisdom, and hope, and people around you to cheer you on? So I follow up my retreats with monthly meetings where we're checking in with people like, how are you doing on this? What's going on with this? And in your life, and people who have recently gone through a divorce or lost a job, a lot of times they're alone in this world, or they don't want to share with, in the community they live in because they're ashamed or sad or heartbroken. And so sometimes it's easier to be with people that you don't know so much. And I think similar to Mountain Valley or Summit Achievement, a lot of times the growth happens when you're away. And sometimes your force goes back to Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, right? The journey is always the same. We either choose to or we jump to the adventure. And in that adventure, we change, and hopefully we come back to our communities to serve and provide value.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love the hero's journey correlation there too, with the idea of a retreat kind of going off and facing some challenges, and really the challenge is facing yourself and what did you learn through that process and what are you bringing back? So
yeah, and it's the stories we tell ourselves, right? The narrative work that you do at Mountain Valley, or that I do at White Mountain Adventure Institute, is like, how do you author the next chapter in your book, or the chapters, and do you want other people to write it, or are you going to write it? As a leader, do you want to really have a healthy organization? Because, again, I help coach leaders. So, like, how do we create healthy climates? Well, we know the first thing is to make sure the leaders are healthy and that they are aligned and they value very much family, friends, and the mission of the organization. And that's what I feel so good about what you're doing at Mountain Valley and all the organizations connected to Moose Lock Visions.
I appreciate that, Will. Thank you. And thank you for being such like I said, a wise mentor and somebody to look up to, and someone who's gracefully written each story, ended each chapter, started anew in such a beautiful way. It's been really awesome to be a part of your life in the way that I've been a part of it. So thank you, man. I really appreciate it.
Well, I'm so grateful for you, Zach. You came into my life for a reason, and I really believe in this idea that there's a flow in the universe, and we meet people, we go through whatever experiences like the one I'm going through now and you're going through in your life, like, because we're supposed to. We're supposed to learn from it. And for anybody who's listening, like, look at what's going on in your life, and if you're really struggling, like, what can I learn from this? There is so much we can learn every day.
Thank you for coming on to share all of that wisdom on this podcast. And this past 40 minutes has been my own little mini retreat for myself. And I feel more aligned and rejuvenated to hang up this call and go back in with my family and focus on what matters. So I appreciate you, Will.
Absolutely. Family first, man. Family first.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another segment of Zach's Hacks, where each week at the end of our episodes, I share a quote that kind of summarizes and touches on the concepts and themes that we talked about in the episode. This week, our quote comes from author Bob Goff, and the quote goes like this: "Embrace uncertainty. Some of the most beautiful chapters in our lives won't have a title until much later." I chose that quote for today's episode because we talked a lot about uncertainty, and transitions come with a lot of uncertainty. And I loved the opening line there of embrace uncertainty, because I feel like that really embodies what Will White has been able to do with this transition and other transitions that he's talked about, that he's experienced in his life, where he's embraced it. He hasn't fought against it. He hasn't pushed against it, and he's just allowed it to happen and allowed it to flow and welcomed it, because he approaches it with this really great question of, what can we learn from this, and what can I learn from this? And I've been through enough transitions to know that there's some deep wisdom to be had here. He also thinks about life as a story, and that's been a big theme of his book and his podcast and all of the wisdom he's shared with me over the years, and the therapy that he does with young people and the coaching and mentoring that he does, is to think about life as a series of chapters. And as much as we try to write the title of the chapter first and then write the chapter after that to fit that title, that's just not how life always works. And sometimes it's easier to add a title to a chapter after the story or after that chapter has already been written. And so I think that really applies to transitions, because we're headed in with a lot of uncertainty and we're not exactly sure what this next chapter is going to hold. We don't really have a preordained idea of what this chapter will contain, but we are able to retroactively look back at a chapter or a season, as we talk about in this episode today, of our life, and then come up with a name for it, and then come up with an understanding and a title for what that chapter meant in the grand narrative of our life. So one more time, the quote for today's Zach's Hack from Bob Goff goes like this: "Embrace uncertainty. Some of the most beautiful chapters in our lives won't have a title until much later." Thank you all again for tuning in to another episode of the Fearless Podcast. As always, if you liked this episode, if you've been following our show, please actually follow it on whatever platform you're doing. Subscribe, download the episodes, share them with friends, share them with family. All of those things that help our podcast grow, reach a broader audience, and have a bigger impact. This is all part of our mission to try to make fear less in the world around us, and we would love if you could support that. Thank you again for tuning in, and we will talk to you guys next week. See ya.